you have any, as we go along, please type them in the chat box and I'll collect them at the end. We'll have a chat at the end, okay? So also feel free to say hello, know where you are. Okay, excited to welcome my colleague Simon. He's here to help us find out more about living and working in Spain as an English teacher. He promises to tell us about the good, the bad, and the ugly about working in Spain. Okay, so Simon, thank you for coming on.
You're welcome, entirely welcome. Thanks for having me, and lovely to see so many people here. That's fabulous. The reason for doing this webinar is really very clear. To really, there's so much on social media that's around, that's talking about living in Spain and working in Spain and what the situation is. I'm hoping to put some clarity on things for you and for other people as well. Okay, I've been working in Spain for, oh crikey, almost 20 years now. Why am I doing this webinar? Well, that's an interesting question. I'm responsible for recruitment in our language centre, and I also work on the Trinity Cert TESOL course with Danny, where one of the things that I do there is to help people with their careers and with all these questions that come up. So hopefully I'm pretty well placed to answer some of these questions. This webinar is really aimed at people who are already in Spain or within the EU with permission to stay. Of course, we'll address the Brexit issue later on. I see people in the chat. Hello to everybody from Indonesia, from Ireland, from Trinidad and Tobago originally, but in France, from Dublin, from Romania, from Rome, all sorts of stuff going on in the chat. Croatia as well, the Netherlands. Fabulous to have you all here. Yeah, if you've got the right to live and work in Europe, then this will be helpful. The Brexit situation complicates things a bit for our friends coming from the UK, but we'll look at those issues later. And also, of course, it's all about teaching English and what it's like to be an English teacher in Spain.
Okay, so that brings me on to the first question. We've had a few questions in. So the first question is really about your personal experience, Simon. How long have you been teaching English in Spain and what do you like about it?
Well, teaching in Spain, about 20 years. Yeah, first came over in 2001. Before that, I started my teaching in 1997. So I'm officially extremely old, which is obviously delightful. Having taken in Istanbul and then Costa Rica, and teaching in London, Seville, and then Cadiz, which is a joy of a place, for the last 17, 18 years. To be honest, it's a profession that I love. To be able to live and work in different places is fantastic. And also, I'm all about connection. So connecting with people from different places, connecting with people, with our students, their families, the community around me. So I love that level of connection. And also seeing people's progress. When you see students learning, it's just such a joyous thing. Whether they're young learners, 5, 6 years old, teenagers or adults, reaching their language objectives and doing what they want to do with English, it's a really wonderful job in many ways.
So can you tell me then if you sound very enthusiastic about it, do you have a kind of a particular favourite level or a favourite age? Tell us a little bit about that and why you like it.
Well, I'll talk about that a little more, but really all levels and ages have their pros and cons, their joys and their challenges. I really like teaching very young learners. The energy that you can get from the youngest students, it can be incredible. Teenagers are famous for being a bit grumpy and sullen, but in my experience, while that's true, with a little bit of motivation, they can be extremely passionate and energetic and creative as well. And teaching adults sort of completes it. which I also enjoy. Nice having people who are there because they're choosing to be, rather than because other people have sent them, like their parents, for example.
Okay, thank you for that. I think moving a little bit more into the industry as such, and a question that we're frequently asked, and I'll ask you for a bit of clarity on this, is around the term Tefl, because increasingly there are Tefl courses available everywhere, and sometimes I think it's difficult for people to know exactly what it means, or what's the difference between courses and so on. So can you give us a bit of information about that, please?
I can, yeah, and thanks for the people who sent questions in before. I don't know if there's any of you people or other people. So we've got some questions, and I'm able to prepare a few bits. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen, so bear with me while I do that. Okay, Danny, can you see that?
Yes.
Fabulous, great. Okay, as you can see, there's not a huge amount on this slide. I don't believe in giving people too much on the slides, but the recordings as well, I should add, will be available to you afterwards. We'll follow up with an email afterwards, sharing the recording with you, so you can watch it at any time. You don't feel like you need to write loads of notes as we're going through. But the question, what is Tefl? Tefl describes the industry, that's teaching English as a foreign language. There's also TESOL, which is teaching English to speakers of other languages. What's the difference? Very little. They're essentially the same thing. Tefl is used all over the world, internationally. It's a shorthand that covers everything. TESOL is often used in North America, and ELT stands for English Language Teaching, and that is the umbrella term for everybody, for all teachers of English across the world, in whatever sort of establishment they're working in. If we think about Tefl, Tefl is the most common acronym used, and then we get into some complications around courses. People will often say, yes, I've got a Tefl course. That's great, but what sort of Tefl course is it? As we know, there's a huge variety. If you look around the internet, you can pay 50 euros or 50 pounds for a course, which is just an online course with no teaching practice. For the same sort of thing, you can pay up to maybe 300 or 400 pounds or 300 or 400 euros. There's other courses which are significantly more expensive, such as the Trinity Cert TESOL that we run here in Cadiz, or the Cambridge equivalent CELTA. Really, these are the two most well recognised and the ones that employers really look for. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on, but really what you're paying for with that is the teaching practice. In fact, someone wise once said to me, you wouldn't pass a test to drive a car, driving test, without getting in the car. The same is true of teaching. Can you be a teacher without being in the classroom? Now, whether the classroom is a real bricks and mortar classroom or whether it's an online classroom well, both are valid, but really to have that quality of connection, then that's really what you're paying for, along with the international recognition. So Tefl and TESOL are two expressions to describe the industry. Tefl is the most widely accepted. Then when you're looking into courses, do be careful about which one you do. There's a lot out there. Just make sure you know what you're buying and why. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of getting a decent job, you're looking at one of the internationally recognised qualifications, really, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. Okay, so moving on then, about, again, a more personal question, would you recommend working as a Tefl teacher or an ELT teacher? Would you recommend it as a job?
That's a great question, really. When I started, When I started, my intention was to do this job for a year or two, travel a bit, see a bit of the world. And I clearly remember my father saying, well, one day, son, you'll get a proper job. Delightfully, I'm still waiting for this proper job to arrive. And until it does, I will carry on. Do I enjoy it, was the question? Yeah, I think you can tell. I absolutely love it. I did promise to talk about the highs and the lows, which I will do. Tefl is not a job where many people make much money. Okay, that's the first thing to have really clear, I think. That it's always provided me with a sustainable lifestyle. I've never gone into debt being a Tefl teacher, but nor have I saved much money. Okay, so wherever I've lived and worked around the world, then it's paid its way. I've had a good time, and I've always had to be careful with money, but it does pay its way. Okay, there are ways you can make money. There's some people that make lots of money, and there are ways to think about doing that. Maybe that'll be something we can talk about in another webinar: how to become rich in EFL. Or perhaps I'm not the person to talk to about those things. So yeah, let's get back to the Spanish context, which is what we're about here today. In Spain, the money is not great. The work is hard, often, lots of varying levels, where you might teach some 7-year-olds, some 15-year-olds, some 35-year-olds, a real mixture. So in terms of money, what can you expect to get in a decent language school in Spain? If you're working full-time, and full-time is considered to be 24 hours a week, teaching, now you think, oh, that sounds good, 24 hours a week work. Yeah, we need to include the preparation, we need to include our planning and our marking and our parents' evenings, etc., etc. But the normal wage is around 1,250 euros a month. Okay, that's a gross figure. So then after that, people will take off tax and what have you. And teachers generally take home, if they're getting paid 1,250 gross, they will generally take home about 1,100 something euros. It really depends. Everybody's tax is slightly different. And so these are all things to take into account. Also, sorry, Danny, go on.
Yeah, I've just had a question there about about related to pay, really. A question about from Carolyn saying, do most language schools pay by the hour, or do you get some kind of contract? And what is the going kind of hourly rate? Can you?
Yeah, that's another good question. Just to welcome Nika, who might have been in the waiting room for some time, so apologies for that. I'll try and keep my eye on that. That would be, okay, we'll talk about contracts and things like that a little later. I think that's a really important question. We're going to look at that when we get to how to know what's a good employer and a bad employer. Generally speaking, to answer your question, you should have a proper contract with all the hours on there that you'll be working. If it's an hourly thing, then it really depends where you're working, but around 13 euros an hour approximately. Okay, is roughly where we get to with that. But there is a huge variety in employers. Some employers are fabulous and some are not. We live in this world of, it's certainly in the Spanish context, of a lack of regulation, which has its blessings and its curses, for sure. One of the great things is that we have freedom. One of the difficult things is, well, we have freedom, and those freedoms can be abused by less scrupulous language school owners. There is everything in Spain. There are some fantastic schools which pay properly, which treat people well, which do a really good job, and others that really don't. One of the things we'll look at shortly is how to tell the difference.
Okay, well, interestingly, that's actually my next question. Okay, so you've talked a little bit about, you know, a good or a bad employer, a kind of professional or not professional school. Could you give us some pointers on what to look for when you're applying for jobs?
Sure. Yeah, again, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, this is the question, really. What's the difference between a good and a bad employer? Yeah, okay. So a few tips. As I said, there is a huge variety. Some people are deeply committed to the profession, and others are in it to make us a quick buck. And the important thing is to try and find out what the difference is. First thing I would say is do check the website. Does it feel professional? Does it feel like these people know what they're doing? Are you getting the impression that this is a serious or an interesting place, the sort of place that you would want to work? The way that people approach websites are often slightly generic, so we don't get the full picture, but what they choose to say or not say can be revealing. Of course, these things are written in Spanish. Good old Google Translate can help a bit. And see where we get to from there. The next thing, of course, is once we get to an interview or even a pre-interview stage, to ask some questions. Now, I don't suggest that we ask all of these questions because you might sound rather demanding at that point. However, I think it's really important to get a clear idea as to where you're going. And the sort of school that it is. You can ask about the history and the approach. How long has the school been running? Did it start this year, last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? What's the history of the school? School owners and directors of studies will enjoy talking about these things as well, talking about their school. You could ask about their approach. How do they go about their work? And from that, you'll get a feeling about how engaged they are with the next point, which is the students. Where are the students from? What sort of students do they have? What do they like about coming to the classes? These are all interesting questions to ask. It shows that you're engaged. It shows that you're interested as well. And what about the staff room? What are the other teachers like who are on the staff? How long have they been there? As I said, don't ask all these questions because it'll sound like an interrogation, but these are things just to get a feel for, okay? What about professional development? I think that any school worth its salt will have some good professional development where there's a program outlined. I mean, I've been teaching for over 20 years, but I'm still learning about teaching all the time. So we never stop developing, no matter how well qualified we are. It's part of the process. So to find out how schools think about professional development, what they do around it, I think is really important. And in some ways, the most important thing for all of us is about pay and working conditions. And here I've included a small sample of some of the Spanish terms. Apologies, I've just realized that I've forgotten to put the accents on. So for people who know Spanish, I apologize, but forgive me for not putting the accents on. So the first is the nomina. The nomina is an official pay slip. This tells you exactly how much the school is paying you, and what you're paying out in tax to the government. If you have a proper contract, you will have a nomina. Now, some of the tricks to be aware of. A good school, again, what makes a good employer? A good employer will pay, a decent employer will pay all the money on the nomina. Often, or sometimes, this is not the case. They may pay half of the hours on the nomina and then half of the hours in cash. This is not good. It's quite common that this happens in Spain, but it's really not good practice. The reason employers do it is to save money. All employers pay 30% on top of your wages to social security. So if you're getting paid 1,250 euros gross, which is a reasonable benchmark, then the employer will be paying somewhere in the region of 350 to 400 euros a month to social security. Okay, so clearly that's why people choose not to pay everything properly. Again, a good school will do that. Danny?
Just a quick, and then the important thing there, I think, is the effect on the teacher. So if they're not having everything, can you just explain?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, the main important effect is that one of the words further down there is paro. Paro is unemployment benefit in Spain. Okay, the way it works in Spain is that you get 70% of your declared income in terms of paro. So if you're earning 1,250 euros a month and it's all on the nomina, then you will get for your paro, if your unemployment benefit, if you're not working over the summer, which is very common, lots of contracts are 9-month contracts. That's important to remember. So what do we do for those other 3 months of the year? Most people will claim unemployment benefit. You become eligible, this is suddenly a bit boring, but it's important. You become eligible for unemployment benefit after contributing to the system for 12 months. What does this mean in a practical sense? This means that that generally people who have just worked 9 months, their first year in Spain, are not eligible for unemployment benefit. When they've worked 3 more months the next year, then you start accumulating rights. Okay, so that's important to know. So why is it important that everything is on the nomina? Primarily for your unemployment benefit, your paro, but also for your retirement. People like me, extremely old, start to think about pensions and what have you. So yeah, again, there's a similar calculation that goes on there. Okay, so there's some things to be aware of as we're moving through. Another thing is the finiquito. Finiquito is your payment for holidays not taken during the year. This is paid at the end of the contract. Typically, it will be about 15, 16 days worth, which would mean about 400 or 500 euros if you're being paid properly. Perhaps a bit more. Lots of schools say that, again, this is poor practice and how to learn what's right and what's wrong. Some schools will say, no, in Easter you have a week, at Christmas you've got 2 weeks. There's all these other holidays through the year, and this is your holiday. Theoretically, technically, legally, it's not. If the school is closed and you can't work, it does not count as holiday. Interesting, strange, but true. Okay, so you should get your Easter, your Christmas holidays, your holidays through the year, and then at the end you should get a payment for holidays not taken, which amounts to maybe actually up to 20 days. So it could be in the region of 800 euros. Again, it's one of the things that schools that are not so good try to do to avoid paying extra. It's your right, it's not extra. Some schools will dress it up as a bonus. They'll say, oh, look, here's your bonus. Aren't you lucky? It's not a bonus, it's your right. It's your legal right. Okay? How do we know what our rights are? This is the next word, convenio. A convenio is a set of rules that any professional industry has. This comes into the next one. Our convenio, our profession is educación no reglada, which means education without rules, which is a strange way of thinking about things, as then we've got a load of rules. To differentiate, this differentiates our type of work from that of mainstream education. So people who are working in primary schools, infant schools, secondary schools, universities is educación reglada. We're in educación no reglada, okay? Along with driving schools, hairdressing places, etc., etc. Okay? And the last word here, which I've sort of covered already, is seguridad social, social security. Really important that you've got a contract. If you've got a contract, you'll get a social security number, which shows that you're in the system, and then then you get entitled to all the health system here in Spain, which is certainly, I'm from the UK, and certainly compared to the British health system, the Spanish health system is fantastic. Okay, so you really want to be on the social security. Any decent employer will be doing it. If you're not, if you don't have a contract, if you don't have a nomina, these are the signs of what is and what isn't a good employer. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then we can move on a bit.
Okay, thanks for that, Simon. That's really, really helpful, and especially, I mean, it's the kind of information that I really wish I'd known when I arrived in Spain, because all of these words came up and I just had no idea what any of them meant and what the implications were. So that was really helpful. Thank you. So another question, again, it's really about looking for a job. How can I find the best jobs in Spain? Okay, just give us an idea of that.
That's another great question. I've just noticed there's a really interesting question in the chat from Neve, I believe is how you pronounce your name. I might be wrong.
Hi, yeah, that's it.
Thanks very much for that. I'll definitely come back to that question at the end. Okay, about qualifications and what you need.
Thank you.
It's interesting with Irish names, M's and H's being a V, I believe. But there we go. Fabulous. Thank you for that question. And other people, if other questions occur to you, do write them in the chat as we go along, and we'll come back. We'll come back to those. So the question about how to get the best job. Yeah. Well, really, this is going to be the subject of the next webinar we do, which is due to be in a couple of weeks. Okay, but I will go into that briefly now. Okay, so much of finding a job in any situation is about being the right person in the right place at the right time. There's an element of luck about it. Of course there is. There always is in any situation. Okay, and it's about how to maximize your chances. I always say to people I give the same advice. Think first, okay, in the Spanish context, do you want to be in a big city? Do you want to be in Madrid, Barcelona, or somewhere a little smaller but still big and vibrant like Seville or Valencia? Or do you want something smaller, somewhere on the coast, like Cadiz, for example, which I can thoroughly recommend? Excuse me. So where do you want to be? I would suggest that so there's two ways of going about this. You either apply before, sending CVs out, saying, listen, I'm particularly interested in this sort of area, etc., etc. I feel myself now getting into detail. And I could talk about this for another half an hour. So this is going to be the subject of the next webinar, okay, which you're totally welcome to come to. It's a big area, and I can talk you through the best ways of finding it. Some people have asked whether, so in brief, think about where you want to be. Think about the sort of schools you want to work in. Get a copy, look at Google, look at Academias de Idiomas on Google for that place. If you go to Madrid, and you put in Academias de Idiomas, you'll get thousands of them, okay? Literally. So then, you have to work through that. If you're in somewhere like Cadiz, there may be 20. Even in this place the size of Cadiz, which has about 150, 120,000 people, there's still probably 20 Academias de Idiomas. There's probably about 20 language schools. Question about Malaga. Yeah, Malaga is an interesting one. Malaga, there's lots of schools in Malaga. There's all sorts of strange things that go on in Malaga. There's some great schools and there's some terrible schools. Again, you really need to be careful about how to approach that. I should add, I'll just pop it here in the chat, that there are associations of language schools. One is ASEIA, which I'm writing in the chat now, and the other is FESE. ASEIA is the Andalucian Association of Language Schools. Okay, And FESE is the national federation. Schools join that, and schools that are in those associations generally, I use this word carefully, generally are good places to work, okay? I'm quite involved in the association. I know what goes on in it. Some schools, most of the schools are good. So you can look at aseia.es and you'll get a list of schools in Malaga, in Cadiz, in Sevilla, whatever. Same is true of FESE, which is the national federation, okay? I see someone's planning to go work in Valencia. Again, the same thing is true for all of these places, okay? All of these places. So one question is, should I apply now? Now is traditionally the time for people to make applications for school in Spain, who are thinking about the coming academic year, who are thinking about what they're going to be needing for next year. COVID has sent everybody into a tiz, not just in EFL, worldwide. And I think all of us have still going through that to a greater or lesser extent. And if anybody's really suffered, then my heart goes out to you for sure. But in terms of the EFL, in terms of teaching English, the show has gone on. We've switched largely, there's 3 ways that people have worked, either online, face-to-face with social distancing, or something called hybrid, which is sort of mixing the two. Again, we can talk about that another time. But it's left directors of studies and school owners just a bit sort of battered by the whole thing, as well as teachers and students, of course, for that matter. So people talking to language school owners and directors of studies at the moment, people are very hesitant to reach out and to respond, okay? Some schools are on it now. Here in our centre, for example, we're interviewing at the moment. We want to get everything done by the end of June. Other schools are very much wait and see, including people who are amazingly qualified with loads of experience. I was talking to someone the other day who has his TESOL, who's studying for his DIP TESOL at the moment, which is a higher qualification, otherwise known as the diploma. And he's got about 5 or 6 years experience. He applied to lots of schools. He said, we were the only people who got back to him. And he was feeling like quite depressed about it. So that's the bad news. The good news is that come September, I predict that there will be a massive shortage of teachers in Spain. So I believe that if you're in the right place, coming back to what I said, the right place, the right person, in the right place, the right time, there'll be jobs aplenty. Okay, it's a little bit nervy, it's a little bit, ooh, shall I go for it or shan't I? You might be, well, you're all over the place, I know. So am I going to move to Spain with the hope? If you're well qualified, if you've got some experience, we can look at this in a minute about what you need, then there will be jobs. I guarantee it. Almost wherever you want to be, okay? So yeah, come September, I believe will be a teacher's market. Right now, school owners and directors of studies, recruiters are feeling a bit tentative, which I understand, but come September, I reckon there'll be loads.
Yeah. And it seems like the way the world's going generally, this kind of uncertainty around, nobody wants to kind of stick their neck out too early, and that idea about, because, you know, nobody knows what's happening, and after the year we've had.
I think that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right, Danny. I think that you know, for me, myself personally, I'm thinking, am I going to go back to the UK this summer? You know, normally I go back and see my family and friends over the summer. But this year I'm thinking, am I going to do that? Probably not. So I think in all of our lives, we've got this sort of hesitancy and uncertainty. And recruiters are in exactly the same position. Okay, so feel free to send your CVs out now. Feel free to make contact with places. Think about where you want to be. Think about the school, sort of school you want to work with. Reach out to people, but don't be downhearted by a lack of response. Okay, at this point.
Nice. Okay, so thinking then, when you do apply for a job, what how, you do quite a lot of recruiting. What do language schools look for when they're recruiting?
Yeah, that's another good question. I'm going to share my screen again because I think I've got some notes on this. Bear with me. Okay, so we talked before about what do employers look for, what makes a good employer and what you should look for. Here we're thinking about what do schools look for. Okay, 3 things essentially: qualifications, experience, enthusiasm. Now, this is something interesting. You'll always see job adverts, and you'll see job adverts saying, we want this, etc., etc. All sorts of things. This is a wish list that schools have. If you don't have all of them, you should still apply. Okay? Employers will take the best candidates they've got. When they post adverts, they generally list a whole load of things that they want. Very few of these are non-negotiable. Of course, teachers want, schools and directors of studies want teachers who are properly qualified. A good school will use that as a selling point. A good school will say, all of our teachers are properly qualified. What does that mean? Well, we touched on this earlier. The Trinity Cert TESOL and the Cambridge equivalent CELTA are the 2 biggies. They're the two that you're almost guaranteed a job. No one will question these qualifications. No one will say, really? Is that any good? No, because they are well recognized, fully accredited, and everybody knows what they mean. Okay? Either the courses are almost identical. Then there are other Tefl qualifications, and I've spoken to all sorts of people, and some school owners don't care what sort of qualification you have. Just so long as it says Tefl qualification, great, fabulous. And you can spend, as I said before, 500 quid, 300, 200, 50. I've seen courses advertised for as little as 50 euros or 50 pounds. There's not much difference these days, I don't think. Do be very careful. Think about there's 2 things to think about. One is employability and professionalism, and the second is your preparedness to go into the classroom. What we're finding increasingly on our courses is that people with lesser qualifications are coming to us because they're not getting the sort of jobs they want. Remember, you want to get those good jobs that pay properly, that are on the conveyor. Well, there's an investment there. There's a professional investment. If you want to be treated like a professional, act like a professional, I think is my feeling. With these 2, you can't go wrong. Okay? Experience, of course. All schools want teachers with experience because, well, they're experienced. They know what they're doing. How do we get experience? We get experience through working. Again, it's part of the process. Schools will want people with experience, but whoever is available, the best person for the job will get that person. Think about experience with adults, teenagers, and children. When I'm talking to people who don't have much experience about their CVs, think about any experience that you have, not just English teaching experience. Think about any experience you have working with children, working with teenagers. Have you run youth clubs? Did you work in a drama society? All sorts of possibilities. Did you do summer camp? And what about adults? Again, if you don't have direct English language teaching, are there other ways that you've taught adults? Teaching, maybe you've had a training position in a company before. All these things are important when we're thinking about these things. And also, people will often ask about exams and experience preparing people for exams. If you don't have experience, I've listed here probably the big 3, Trinity, Cambridge, and Aptis, very different exams. Again, if you haven't taught them, if you don't know what they are, I recommend you do some research. You can find out easily on these associations or these organizations' websites what they're all about, and then you can talk with some knowledge. I haven't taught this, but I understand and I know this, that, and the other. So qualifications, experience, and enthusiasm. Enthusiasm. Yeah, this is perhaps the biggest part of, perhaps the most important part. You can be the best qualified, most experienced teacher in the world, but you can be lacking enthusiasm and passion. And I don't want you anywhere near my students, if that's the case, to be honest. We need to remember that our profession sits in the middle of education and entertainment. This concept of edutainment doesn't need to be all singing and all dancing, but absolutely students need to enjoy coming. They need to feel, they need to be engaged, and they need to want to be in the classroom. I think that's true for any classroom, but that's certainly true when we're talking about extracurricular classes, when people are coming after school or after work, and it's an extra. We really need teachers to be enthusiastic, passionate, motivated. This does not mean we need to be crazy clowns jumping around the classroom. Some of the most effective teachers I've worked with are calm and quiet. In fact, when we're working with young learners, we want to absorb their energy, not add to it. Perhaps when we're working with teenagers and adults who are tired, at that point, yeah, we need to give them energy. So this concept that working with kids, we need to be clowns, I don't buy into. Yes, our classes need to be engaging and need to be interesting, and the students need to enjoy themselves. But yeah, clowns, I'm not a clown. I might have seen it, but I'm not a clown, that's for sure. So these are the things that language schools really look for. We'll talk in another webinar, I believe the third in this series, is you're going to look more closely at Tefl courses, at the different types that there are. As we said before as well, we provide the Trinity Cert TESOL. Oh, and if you're interested, then do stay till the end of the webinar, because there'll be a very special offer for our Cert TESOL courses, which only lucky people who stay to the end and only people who are here live will get. Okay, so the other thing to say is that what language schools want are not specialists. Some people will define themselves as, I am a specialist in teaching teenagers. Fabulous, but I also need you to teach 7-year-olds. I also need you to teach adults. So you're no good to me. What language schools look for are generalists, are quality generalists who can do a job across a number of ages and levels. In fact, someone said to me, people describe themselves as specialists. They're not specialists, they're just limited. That's an interesting way of thinking about things. So yeah, I'd avoid specialization in terms of the language school market. In terms of working online, that's a different thing. You might be looking for niche markets online, but again, that's a whole nother webinar.
Okay, thanks for that. I think so. So it sounds like from what you said there, what schools are looking for, there's a lot within it which is around young learners. You know, I think it's something that if people are going to work in Spain, they will teach young learners. It's something that's kind of can't get away from.
Yep. Yeah, and nor should you want to. If you're coming to work in Spain, you should be embracing the idea of working with younger learners. You should be embracing the idea of variety. Here, the market very much is, most language schools start from 3 or 4 years old. Don't be too frightened by that. You know, there's ways to prepare yourself and think about that. Lots of primary age children between 7 and 11 years old, or 7 and 12 years old. And then lots and lots of teenagers as well. The adult market sort of goes up and down depending on all sorts of factors. But the kids and the teenagers, they're the ones that you're going to be. If people don't want to teach kids, my advice would be either stick to the biggest cities or don't come to Spain.
I think as well, I mean, I don't know if you're going to talk about it in another webinar, but because we also run the Young Learners training course, which I think people often do to have that if they've already got a teaching qualification, but just to give them a kind of edge in the market looking for work, and also maybe to take that fear away from teaching kids, which people often have. They're kind of, children aren't scary, but they often can be if you're going to think you're going to go and stand in front of a room of them. So I think, you know, any extra confidence helps, doesn't it?
Certainly, I think there's two things. You touched on both of them there, I think, really. One is about a professional approach and preparing yourself professionally to be in the best position to take advantage of these things and to show to potential employers that you're serious and you know what's what. The other thing is, and perhaps arguably most importantly, it's about you and your self-confidence. Again, there's loads of courses you can do online. Some of them are free, some of them are paid for, all sorts of different things. Do your research. Of course, ours is fabulous, but that's a whole nother point. So, yeah.
Okay. Moving on to then, so if you can give us just really kind of focusing in on what a normal day teaching is like in Spain. We've had a question around basically is teaching afternoon or evening. So could you give us a typical day breakdown?
Yeah, I've noticed that there's some questions in the chat which I'm sort of keeping up with. Apologies if I'm not, about working as a freelancer, or correctly said, autónomo, or working for a language school, the difference between those things. I'll come to that at the end, okay? So the question was around a working day. Yes, okay. So, as I said, it's after schools. So, our working day in the classroom tends to start at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and finish around 10 o'clock in the evening, which is crazy late from some perspectives. But in terms of Spanish culture in the main, then it's a great time to go out to eat. It's 10 o'clock at night. That's sort of normal for Spain, which lives under some pretty strange, well, different cultural norms to other places. And again, we can be there starting work at 4 o'clock when kids have been to school, they've gone home, they've had lunch. There's a concept of the siesta that lives. From the best of my knowledge, very few people actually sleep a siesta, but lots of people will just chill out for a bit and watch a bit of telly or whatever. So classes starting at 4, 4:30 is good. Remember, we talked about 24 hours teaching a week as being full-time. So 4 to 10, Monday to Thursday, bingo, you're done. Okay, that gives you a general guidelines. Again, if you're in a good school, you'll have breaks between your classes. So it might go a little later than that, or it might start a little earlier. Some people will work on Fridays as well. Personally, I'm working towards a 4-day week with a 3-day weekend. That feels like quite a nice life balance. And if I could pull that off regularly, I'll be more than happy. So there is the possibility for that. It is hard work. It is, you're working with lots of different types of students through the day. We need to be good with 5-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 18-year-olds and all of these, and adults of all different levels, and exams. All of these take preparation. The first year, I was once given a piece of advice, but the first year in working as a teacher in Spain, or anywhere really, is hard work. You're learning a lot. You're reading a lot. You're experiencing a lot. Your sort of curve of knowledge and experience and comfort shoots up dramatically. The second year, in fact, when you come back after Christmas, after your Christmas holidays, and you meet your students again, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I sort of know what's going on here. And then comes Easter and all the fun around Easter in Spain as well. And you're sort of in a groove. And by the time you've got to the end of that first year, you've been through that first cycle. So first year is tough. First term is tough. The first few weeks are probably the toughest. Once you've got your head in gear, once you know what's going on, then things become significantly easier. second year, third year, fourth year, you're in a groove, you know what's what, and you know what to understand. But during the day, you will often start with younger children earlier. They'll get older as you go up, and you might end the day with some adults. Class length is usually an hour, in some cases an hour and a half. Okay. Personally, I like hour-long classes, especially with children and teenagers. It's a little bit snappier. It's sort of in, do some stuff, do some speaking, play a game at the end, and then off you go. It's relatively straightforward. An hour and a half feels like quite a long time to me, but that's beside the point. Coming back to this idea of the generalist, so important in that. The youngest students, us as a clown, yes, no, different people have different styles. There's no one way to do this. This is probably what I love most about teaching. I should have said this at the beginning, actually. That the thing I love most about teaching is it's a human act. I don't know if there's a guy called Ken Robinson. I think he did one of the most seen TED Talks. If you get the chance, check it out. It's called Schools Kill Creativity. And in that, Ken Robinson's Schools Kill Creativity, in that he says, teaching is a human endeavor, not a delivery system. We're not working in a factory, putting pieces in things. We don't, X plus Y doesn't always equal Z. Okay? It's a human endeavor. We're dealing with people. That's perhaps the thing I love most about it. So, yeah, the human element is really important. Us as teachers will have different ways of approaching things. We'll learn. I'm continually learning after 20 odd years in the profession. I'm continually learning new things about how to work with groups and classes, okay? It's a joyous thing. It's a wonderful thing. At its best, it's a huge amount of fun and really rewarding. At its worst, you want to tear your hair out. I'm sort of lacking hair, as you can see. Not that I've had lots of terrible classes, but I think because we feel so engaged with it on a human level, then it affects us on emotional levels as well. A fabulous class will take you up here. A terrible class will take you down there. I'm also aware, as we're going through this, that I'm talking mostly about working in a traditional language school, okay, which runs along these lines. There are plenty of other ways, increasing ways to earn a living in Spain. And this is potentially another webinar because there is such a big, expanding new area. There's lots of teachers that are mixing things up. And this is why it's important with this question about what's your normal day like. Some teachers will teach online classes in the morning and then will come and teach in a language school in the afternoon, more and more. Okay, so you can mix and match these things a bit. And then if we're talking about online, and this is a huge space, even more jungle-like than the language school space, but people do really well out of it. People enjoy it. People say, well, I don't need to leave home. I can, you know, that's that typical thing. I can put a shirt on and then have pajamas on underneath. But there's lots of great professionals who are working online as well, as a way to supplement their income. And again, all sorts of different approaches. You could be teaching in a language, in an online language school to students in all over the world. China is a massive market, for example. There's also lots of people in Spain who want to learn online as well. So again, another big webinar. Generally, there's 3 ways of doing that. Language schools online, selling yourself online. I don't mean like, you know, in a good way, like setting up your own thing and thinking about your niche or whatever online. And a third, which escapes me now. Ah, yes, the sort of teacher websites which is not the same as setting up yourself as a business, but it's about just putting yourself out there on an independent teaching website, which means you attracting students, but not being tied into a language school. Again, big area, complicated area. But in terms of people's lives, teachers who work with us, for example, some teachers want to work full-time and exclusively with us, great. Other teachers want to work part-time with us and part-time online to get that balance of things, also great. I think that, you know, language school owners or directors of studies, whoever's recruiting, don't just want people who are going to work 24 hours a week. They, or we in this case, want a level of flexibility as well. If someone says, actually, Simon, I'm happy to work between 10 and 15 hours a week. When do you need me? And I'll make up the rest other times. Brilliant. That gives me so much flexibility. I know that you're not depending on me to the same sort of extent. So there's pros and cons for everybody. Yeah. Sorry, that's a long answer.
There are a couple more questions, and then I've been collecting them from the chat. So if we just go through these last two, and then we'll look at what people have asked. One question you've kind of half answered anyway, but if you just want to give a kind of a little idea about, in your experience, having recruited a lot of people and having spoken to a lot of people through the training courses in terms of careers, what sort of people work as English teachers? I mean, it's very clear that anyone can be an English teacher, but in what have you seen? What are the kind of profiles?
I think that's really interesting. The first thing is to address the issue about speakers of English as a first language, a second language, a third language, or whatever. Spain has a reputation as being somewhere that's really attached to the native speaker. Now, this is a term that I and many serious ELT professionals completely reject. The idea of being a native speaker is really weird. I just don't like using the word. Then to define ourselves as a non-native speaker, to define ourselves as something that we're not, is also really weird. Okay, how does this work in reality? Spain is going through, generally, through a process of changing its mentality. I think that in many ways, language schools for years and years have gone on and on and on about how all of our teachers come from England. All of our teachers come from England or the United States. This model is changing. The world we live in is a multicultural, interconnected, global experience. The most progressive language schools in Spain are really embracing this idea of the staff room being a version of this sort of international phenomenon. So teachers from everywhere, teachers who speak all sorts of different languages as a first language, and then spoken English as a second language. There's something really powerful about having a role model in a classroom who's had to learn English rather than someone who's just born into the language. I think this is really powerful. Okay, then in terms of qualifications, if we go back to that, increasingly you'll see adverts for schools saying we require people who speak English as a first language or have a recognized advanced level of English. This is generally considered to be a C2. If you're aware of the Council of Europe framework for these things, you've got A1 up to C2. C2 is described as being a proficient user of English. Other people will sort of, again, in my opinion, erroneously, but people are making an attempt to talk about near native level, which is wrong, but we're sort of getting there, which is a bit better. So again, these are things to bear in mind. So for people who speak English, and again, really, this boils down to supply and demand at the end of the day. If you are a good speaker of English, well qualified, you will find work in Spain in September. I am 95% sure. So that's one group of people I think it's really important to talk about. So often the idea of an English teacher is someone from an English-speaking country. Absolutely not the case anymore. In fact, on our Cert TESOL courses, about 40% of the graduates who come through our program are people who speak English as a second or a third language. Okay, so increasingly appropriate. Who teaches English in Spain? People coming from different places. I see there's people here from all over the place, which is fab. People are attracted to the Spanish lifestyle, which we sort of plug into as TEFL teachers as well. You know, these late evenings, goes along with the Spanish lifestyle. People who want to be here for a year or 2 or 3, or in my case 20, God knows how long I'm going to be here. I'll probably live here forever. Other people who have retired to Spain or have taken early retirement from other things and want to connect with the community. Remember before I was talking about connections with the community. And often people who've maybe taken early retirement feel a sense of isolation. Teaching is something, you don't just live or travel through a place, you're engaging with people in that space. So I think there's something really powerful in that, and really beautiful as well. You're not just living here, you're really taking part.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so before there's just one last question. It's a little bit, we've talked quite a lot about you talked about the COVID situation, so I'd say that's kind of covered. But for anyone who's a practicality question around Brexit, for anybody who's coming from the UK and potential changes around that, could you give us any kind of pointers?
Yeah, I certainly can. The answer is it's going to be really, really difficult. Brexit has really messed things up for so many people in so many ways. A terrible idea has been terribly executed by terrible people, but that's just my opinion. Yeah, it's going to be really difficult. If people aren't resident in Spain or within an EU country, it's going to be really, really tough. This is another reason why people who speak English as a second or third language are going to be in a better position than they were before. There used to be lots of people coming over from the UK to Spain to start work in September. It's either going to be illegal, and then there's some questions there about do you want to work in that way, or it's going to be really difficult. If people do want to go down that route, the advice I mentioned before from FESE, the National Federation, is that it's going to be impossible. It's not impossible, it's going to be difficult. You need an employer to sponsor you, or you need to come on a student visa. Again, this is a big area, and again, a possible how to come to Spain post-Brexit is another webinar perhaps that we can think about. I see Marian's put on there, sounds helpful, but hopefully about retired people. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We're only as old as we feel, I think is the important thing there. And oftentimes, and people do want mature teachers who aren't here just to mess around in the same sort of way, a bit more serious about things perhaps. Sorry, what was the question, Danny? I forgot. I've gone off track.
The question was basically around implications of Brexit.
Oh, Brexit, that's it. Yeah, it's going to be really tough. You can find information on the British Embassy website about living and working in Spain. They've got complete stuff there. But what it says there, if you're not already resident in Spain or in the EU, basically it's going to be really tough.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I've got the questions. Some of them handily you've kind of answered, but before we go through the questions that I've collected, could you just remind or recap what we kind of offer and talk a little bit about?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, maybe it ties in with the questions. So if we go through the questions quickly first and then come to that at the end.
Okay, great. So I've kind of tried to link them together. You've talked about the native speaker, non-native speaker preference. So I think that was from Daria, I believe. So a question which is around, an early question from Neve around, can I come and work in Spain with a teaching degree, education degree, or do I need to get a specific EFL qualification?
That's a great question, yeah. Again, you will get work. I believe it's going to be a teacher's market. So in some ways, a teaching qualification like a PGCE in a British context really. Oh, hello, Neve. You turned your camera off. That's nice. That sort of trumps the Tefl qualification in many, many ways. A Trinity Cert TESOL or generally lasts for 4 or 5 weeks full time, or 11 weeks part time. If you've got a BEd or a PGCE, that's significantly more hours. So yeah, it's considered to be higher than that sort of thing. Having said that, When at interview, what I see is that people don't necessarily understand, people who've got a PGC or a different type of teaching qualification, or a BEd or whatever it might be, don't understand teaching English in the same way that someone who's done a decent cert course. And we've also had people throughout the years come to us, people who've been teaching in primary, secondary education. We've had deputy head teachers come to us. Everybody who's done the course with us, and I assume this is true of other people as well, have always said how much they've benefited from it and how much they've moved forward through it. Some people, I'm thinking of the deputy head teacher who did the course many years ago. She said, I've never had such detailed and helpful feedback in teaching practice. There is a different way of thinking about it. Is it necessary? No. Is it a good idea? Yes. You know, maybe you come to Spain for a year and see how it goes, and you will get work. I think mainly for you, with that sort of background, it's mostly about how you feel going into it, whether you want that confidence and that extra layer. I hope that answers the question.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Linked to that, there's a question from Craig about employability and how much difference would having a diploma in TESOL or a Delta make?
Okay, yeah, just a quick thing about that. I mentioned it earlier. Thanks, Craig, for the question. That's a good one. Yeah, we start off with the certificate course, with the Trinity Cert TESOL or the CELTA, which is the Cambridge one. We then go up a level to the diploma course. The diploma course, again, very, very similar in the two places. The Trinity is the DIP TESOL. The Cambridge one is called Delta. They're both fine qualifications. Really hard work. In that, what they tend to do is take apart your teaching and then reconstruct it again. People start the course as good teachers and finish the course feeling like experts. So that's sort of where that takes us. Usually for people who've got, well, I think the minimum is 2 or 3 years teaching experience. Okay. What difference does it make? Craig, I'm coming to answer your question now. What difference does it make? Again, it really depends on the school. I was reading in a chat page in Malaga, teachers in Malaga, the tales of woe of a diploma qualified teacher who's going for interviews, and the people who were interviewing her didn't know what a diploma was. So she's like, I've just spent €2,500 euros. I've sweated and strained my way through things in order to get a qualification that some people don't know even what it is. How depressing is that? This gives you an indication as to the variety of schools that there are. There's other schools that will pay extra if you're a diploma teacher, and also with the diploma, you get access into senior teacher positions, into management positions, into teacher training, etc., etc. And most importantly, people are just better teachers after it. So the question was, is it worth it? Was it, or what difference does it make?
In terms of employability, yeah.
Yeah. Again, when I see, there's not many people who have a diploma. When I see someone with a diploma and it pops on my desk, I think, ooh, fancy.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions I'm going to group together, which are about practicalities, paperwork, and so on. But we just had a question from Micah, who is talking about doing a master's in Spain and doing a certificate at the same time. Is that recommendable in terms of workload?
That's really interesting. It's a good question, Mike. And also, the clever thing about that is it would get you through the student visa requirement. So if people are coming from the UK and they want to study here, they need to be studying a full-time course, which is a minimum of 20 hours a week studying. Okay, so a master's course would absolutely give you that. Doing a certificate at the same time, well,
going on a bit. I didn't realise.
The certificate is a pretty intense experience. Okay, that's the first thing to say. It's not to be done lightly. In terms of the 4 or 5 week courses, we run a 5-week course here on the Trinity TESOL, and that's about 40 hours a week study time. That's a lot of hours. So in terms of, and then there's extras to do as well. It really is a massive undertaking. Totally doable, totally achievable. We've been running the courses, what, 16, 17 years, something like that? Lots of people coming through them. It is doable, but it's a lot of work. Can you do that at the same time as studying Spanish or doing a master's? No. But you can do it. You can do it before or after. So, for example, if you were to start thinking about that particular idea, your master's could start in September, and you could do a cert course in August, for example. That would dovetail quite nicely. That could work. Now, interestingly, when you're working with when you've got a student visa, I don't know if this is sort of where your question's going, Michael, or not, but when you've got a student visa, you are entitled to work. You can work with a student visa. It's the easiest way to come into Spain and to get work. It's still a pain in the bum, but it's totally possible. Okay, lots of pieces of paper to fill out. Spanish bureaucracy is always great. You need to do the paperwork before you come to Spain. Okay, if you do the course with us, we can help with all of that sort of stuff as well. Okay, because it is quite a process.
Thank you.
If you're studying 20 hours a week, you can legally work up to 20 hours a week as well. Yes. Okay. And when we bear in mind that 24 hours is considered full time, then 20 hours is pretty damn close. Okay. And that's a really interesting way into doing the into living here in Spain through doing a master's course. Interestingly, you can, and this is a little loophole here, which is an interesting one to consider, you could be registered on a master's course, which potentially lasts a year, right, Michael? That's the usual length of these things. It takes a year for a master's. If in the first month, week, 2 months, whatever, at any point during that time, if you find a job, then you can take the job and you can stay in that job for as long as the contract lasts, even if you're then not studying. Little loophole here, right? There's a little loophole whereby what that means is that you could register and pay all your stuff for the first term, and then you could stay for the full academic year teaching, because you've got your student visa and you've got the job during that time. Okay, if that makes sense, I hope so. So it's a little sneaky loophole.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Question then about the kind of famous Spanish paperwork, bureaucracy and so on. There's a couple of questions. One is about, so for someone who's an EU citizen, realistically, how time consuming is it to become eligible to work?
If you're an EU citizen,
yeah,
piece of cake, no problem. No problem at all. That's why employers will love you. That's why if you've got a C2 level, if you've got a cert TESOL, if you've got some experience or experience working with children or teenagers, and if you've got, if your level of English is a good enough level, you will find work because it's so easy. We have freedom of movement. We have freedom of work. We have these beautiful freedoms that the crazy British have decided to give up. But there we go. Anyway.
So
EU citizens, no bother.
Okay. Question from Emma was a question, basically, is a social security number the same as a NIE?
Good question. No, they're two different things. NIE is your Número de Identificación de Extranjero, your foreigner's identity number, and that has all your financial stuff on it. Once you've got that, then you take that and your contract, and you go and you get your social security number. Número de afiliación de seguridad social. Okay. Don't forget all this stuff. It's not going anywhere. We'll send you or send you a copy of the webinar, which we're recording. And so if there's anything that you can't remember, you can go back. You can also always get me on, I'll stick it in the chat now, on Simon at activelanguage.net. So
Can I then interrupt with a question from, basically, I think this is the rest of the questions from Marion and Nika, similar questions about how different, okay, working for a language academy or working as autonomo, which is effectively a freelancer, the differences there, or working as a private teacher. So Marion asked about working as a private teacher, kind of.
Yeah, there's lots of work in Spain doing that as well. Then we get into another interesting legal area where if you are freelancing, then you are theoretically, at least, obliged to pay your autonomo, your freelancer's tax, which starts off in the first year as quite cheap. It goes up very, very sharply. It goes up over time. We end up paying around 250, 280 euros a month, just for the pleasure of being a freelance. But I believe Spain is one of the most expensive places in Europe to be self-employed. It's utterly crazy, and of course what it does is encourage more of a black market economy where people are working cash in hand and not declaring things. So it's this double-edged sword. That's the situation at the moment. So yeah, there's lots of people working privately with one-to-one classes. It's about building yourself up. At that point, effectively, you're a business. You're running your own business. You're running your own life at that point. So it's about charging properly. It's about factoring in all sorts of things. And the same online as well, whether it's online or face-to-face. Yeah, there's a big market for that. There's plenty of people that do that and live sort of semi-legally. I wouldn't condone such a thing. I believe that if we're living somewhere, we should be paying proper taxes, etc., etc. Their counter argument is, well, if the tax system is so ridiculous, then I'll try and find a way around it. So I'm not a political judge on that one. You do what you think. But yeah, lots of work.
I think as well, what I've noticed with people who don't necessarily want to work in an academy, they find like local Facebook groups and they'll put their information there. So for example, if you're in Malaga, it would be finding kind of areas where people are looking for classes, you know, something that people...
Again, I think this is another big area that we talked about a little bit during this webinar. More in depth, we'll look at that on when we talk about how to find the best jobs, because the best job for you might be working for yourself, doing private classes, either online or face-to-face. Marion's very politely got her hand up. Would you like to ask a question, Marion? Feel free.
Yeah, I think Marion's put it in the...
Okay, it's in the chat. The question about the age barrier.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, it depends on the school. Most schools that I know, yeah, I mean, there's a certain level of energy that's required to teach for that amount of time and those sorts of ages, of course. But age is never a barrier, I don't think. There's some schools that actively prefer a more mature teacher, thinking that their students are a bit more relaxed when they've got a more mature student, a more mature teacher. So again, it depends on the school. There's so many different schools.
Yeah, but my question is specifically, I know that the retirement age in Spain is 65, and that's exactly my age. So you gave me a little bit of hope when you said retired people. I have no retirement. I need to work, and I come from tourism, which you know what happened to it.
Yeah.
So I need to work soon. You know, I stuck all my energy into getting a Tefl degree and into doing all the practicum, practice teaching and so on. But I really would like to find a job. But if not, I'm going to be forced to find my own private students. So I just want to know if there's any chance of me being employed by a language academy or whether I can just forget it, period.
Absolutely, there is, Marion. Absolutely, there's every chance. As I said, I really believe that if people have got some relevant experience, the right qualifications, and the necessary enthusiasm and passion, those are the three things, remember, that we talked about. If you've got those, why shouldn't you get a job? This will be a teacher's market. Okay, I'm sure of it come September. I'm really positive. At the moment, everyone's saying, oh, I don't know. When we think about Brexit, which stops Brits from coming over in the same way. When we think about COVID, that people are often thinking, I'm not going to move around this year, I'll wait till next year. I believe that come September, there's going to be a perfect moment for all sorts of teachers to find work in Spain. And the way to get the right jobs is to be qualified to the extent that you can. So yes, Marion, go for it. Absolutely.
You've given me hope. Thank you.
Good. Okay. So then I think I've covered all the questions that came up in the chat. So if you want to.
Fabulous. If people do want to get in touch, feel free to do so. My email address is in the chat there. It's been great having you here. Just a quick reminder about what we do. We run the Trinity Cert TESOL courses, 4 weeks or 11 weeks, full-time or part-time. Beg your pardon, 5 weeks. Thank you, Danny. And that's about 40 hours studying a week. 11 weeks is about 20 a week. Both have full teaching practice with qualified tutors, where you will be teaching classes and being observed, whether that's online or here in Cadiz face-to-face. The online option is exactly the same. There's no difference in the only difference is in how it's done. Lots of Zoom action like this, and lots of independent study going on as well. Both courses are available. We also do the diploma course that we talked about and the young learners course. Do have a look at our website, activelanguage.net. And the special offer, that's what you've all been waiting for, that's right. Because you're here, we're very aware that the Cert TESOL course is an expensive course. The price is 1,500 euros, okay? Absolutely, it's worth it. It's a professional investment, and that's, as we talked about, it gives you the access to those jobs as well as the confidence to go on and teach. Because you're here today, in fact, I'm just going to stop recording this now because it's not for everybody. How do I do that? Oh, there we go. Good.